You don't know your greatest weapon, silence. Stoic philosophy for dealing with toxic people. The world punishes the silent. Or does it? You've been lied to. From the moment you were old enough to understand the world around you, you were handed a set of rules. Unwritten rules, mostly. The kind that nobody explains directly but everyone seems to enforce. And one of those rules, perhaps the most damaging of all, went something like this. Speak up, or get left behind. Fight back. Make yourself heard. The loudest voice wins. The most aggressive person gets the deal, the respect, the last word. The one who stays quiet gets walked over, dismissed, forgotten. Silence, in the world you grew up in, was not a strategy. It was a failure, a sign that you had nothing worth saying, or worse, that you were too afraid to say it. And so you adapted. You learned to react quickly, to defend yourself before the attack even fully landed, to justify your choices, explain your decisions, argue your case. Every time someone challenged you, you met the challenge. Every time someone threw words at you like weapons, you threw words back. Every time someone tried to diminish you, you scrambled, desperately, exhaustingly, to prove your worth through language. You became fast, sharp-tongued, ready for confrontation at a moment's notice. And the world around you rewarded this, at least on the surface. You were seen as someone who didn't take anything from anybody, someone with a backbone, someone who could hold their own. But here's what nobody told you about that way of living. It's expensive, extraordinarily expensive. Not in money, in something far more precious. In energy, in peace, in mental clarity, in the slow, steady erosion of your inner world, chipped away by 1,000 unnecessary conflicts with people who were never worth engaging in the first place. Think about the last time you got into an argument you didn't need to have. Think about how long it stayed with you afterward, how it replayed in your mind, the words you said, the words they said, the things you wish you'd said differently. Think about how much of your mental space was occupied by that conflict, space that could have been used for creativity, for rest, for the things and people that actually matter to you. Now multiply that by every unnecessary argument you've had in the last year, the last 5 years, your entire adult life. That is the true cost of being reactive, not the argument itself, but the compound drain of a lifetime spent engaging with every provocation that finds its way to your door. And here is the part that should make you stop entirely. Most of those provocations, they were designed specifically to drain you. Engineered, consciously or not, by people who knew that your reaction was the most valuable thing they could extract from you. Your anger was their entertainment. Your defense was their proof of power. Your desperation to be understood was their control. You were not fighting them. You were fueling them. Here's the truth that the world doesn't want you to discover, because a world full of reactive, easily provoked people is a world that is very easy to control. The world doesn't punish the silent. The world fears the silent. Because a person who has mastered silence cannot be manipulated through provocation, cannot be made to reveal their weaknesses on command, cannot be pulled off center by someone else's chaos, cannot be controlled. The silent person is the most dangerous person in any room, not because they're plotting, not because they're passive, but because they have achieved something that most human beings never will. Complete sovereignty over their own reactions. They cannot be baited, they cannot be triggered, they cannot be used, and today, that person is who you are going to become. Silence is not your weakness. It has never been your weakness. It is the most powerful weapon available to you, and it has been inside you this entire time waiting to be discovered. Today, that changes. What the Stoics really taught about silence. Over 2,000 years ago, in the marketplaces and schools of ancient Greece and Rome, a group of philosophers began developing a system of thought so radical, so counterintuitive, and so profoundly practical that it would survive every empire, every war, every revolution, every technological transformation, and arrive at your doorstep today as relevant as the moment it was first articulated. That system was Stoicism. And at its very core, beneath all the discussions of virtue and logic and cosmology, was one deceptively simple idea. You cannot control the world, but you can always control yourself, your thoughts, your judgments, your responses, your inner world. These belong to you and only you, and no external force, no person, no circumstance, no catastrophe can take them without your permission. Now most people hear this and think they understand it. They nod. They say, yes, I can't control other people, only myself. And then they go home and spend 3 hours rage typing a response to someone online, or lie awake at night rehearsing arguments with people who will never change their minds, or spend their lunch break venting to a coworker about someone who needs to be put in their place. Understanding the idea and living the idea are entirely different things. And the Stoics knew this, which is why they didn't just philosophize. They built a rigorous system of daily practices, mental exercises, and behavioral disciplines designed to transform the idea into lived reality. Silence was one of the central tools of that system. But here is where the misunderstanding begins, and where most modern interpretations of Stoicism go wrong. When the Stoics advocated for silence, they were not talking about suppression. They were not saying, swallow your pain, pretend you don't feel anything, become a stone. That is not Stoicism. That is emotional repression, and it creates its own category of damage. What they were talking about was something far more sophisticated. They were making a distinction between two fundamentally different kinds of quiet, and the difference between them changes everything. The first kind is passive silence, the silence of someone who has been overwhelmed, who doesn't know what to say, who is afraid to speak or has given up trying to be heard. This is the silence of defeat. It communicates helplessness, and it offers no protection and no power. The second kind is active silence, the silence of someone who has full awareness, full understanding, and complete capacity to respond, and who chooses not to. This is the silence of mastery. It communicates something that words never can, an absolute, unshakable confidence in one's own inner world that requires no external validation, no argument, no defense. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue." He wasn't advocating for muteness. He was pointing to the fact that a misspoken word can cause damage that no amount of subsequent speech can undo, and that the safest, most powerful position in any conflict is often to say nothing at all until you are completely certain that speaking will serve you. This is what Marcus Aurelius practiced when he encountered criticism, betrayal, and provocation from people who surrounded him at the highest levels of power. Not because he had no words, he had more rhetorical power than virtually any person alive, but because he understood that a response given in the heat of emotion rarely serves the responder. It serves the provocateur. And this is what Seneca warned about repeatedly in his letters, that words spoken carelessly are not just wasted, they are handed over. They become property of whoever receives them, to be used, twisted, and weaponized in ways you cannot anticipate or control. The Stoic teaching on silence, then, is not a passive philosophy. It is an aggressive one. It is the aggressive pursuit of self-mastery in a world designed to steal your self-control. It is the recognition that your words are your most exposed vulnerability, and that guarding them is not weakness but the highest form of strategic intelligence. It is the understanding that the most powerful statement you can make in the face of chaos, cruelty, or manipulation is not a speech. It is the absolute, unwavering stillness of a person who cannot be moved. That stillness is what these ancient men built their lives around. And it is what we are going to build into yours. The anatomy of a toxic person. The word toxic gets used so frequently today that it risks losing its meaning entirely. It's been applied to everything from abusive relationships to mildly annoying coworkers to people who simply disagree with us. Before we can talk about how silence protects you from toxic people, we need to be precise about what we actually mean. In the Stoic framework, a toxic person is not simply someone who is difficult, or different, or challenging. Difficulty and challenge are often valuable. They force growth, build resilience, sharpen thinking. A toxic person is something more specific and more dangerous. Someone whose presence in your life systematically undermines your peace, your self-worth, or your capacity for rational thought. not as a side effect of their own struggles, but as a function of how they operate in the world. The key distinction is this: most people hurt others accidentally, through their own wounds, their own limitations, their own moments of thoughtlessness. They cause pain without intending it, and when they realize what they've done, they feel genuine remorse. This is not toxicity. This is humanity. A truly toxic person causes harm instrumentally. Whether consciously or not, they use other people's emotions, reactions, and vulnerabilities as tools for their own benefit, to feel powerful, to feel superior, to distract themselves from their own inner chaos, or simply to fill the endless void of needing to matter by making sure others feel smaller. They come in recognizable archetypes. There is the provocateur, the person who is never happy unless there is conflict in the air, who picks fights not because they have genuine grievances, but because conflict makes them feel alive. Silence bores them. Peace makes them uncomfortable. They will manufacture a crisis from nothing, simply to have something to react to. There is the gaslighter, who will say something cutting, watch you react, and then look at you with genuine bewilderment and say, "Why are you so sensitive? I didn't mean anything by it." They rewrite reality in real time, making you question your own perceptions. They depend on you engaging with their version of events, because the moment you stop trying to establish the truth with them, the game ends. There is the energy vampire, who doesn't necessarily attack you directly, but who drains you through endless complaining, victimhood, and emotional dumping. They don't want solutions. They want an audience, and they will take whatever you give them and come back for more, indefinitely, leaving you emptied out while they feel temporarily relieved. There is the public humiliator, who does their work in front of others, who makes their comments at dinner tables, in meetings, in group chats, not because the message is for you, but because the audience is. Your humiliation is a performance for their benefit. Your reaction, anger, tears, defensiveness, is the finale they're waiting for. And there is the chronic underminer, who never says anything overtly cruel, but whose every interaction leaves you feeling slightly smaller, slightly less confident, slightly more uncertain of yourself. They operate through implication, through faint praise, through the perfectly timed question that makes you doubt everything. Different faces, different tactics, but the same engine running underneath all of them. They need your reaction. This is the single most important thing to understand about every toxic person you will ever encounter. Their strategy is entirely dependent on your engagement. The provocateur needs you to fight back. The gaslighter needs you to argue about reality. The energy vampire needs you to listen and respond. The public humiliator needs you to react visibly. The underminer needs you to try to prove yourself. Remove the reaction, remove the engagement, and every single one of these strategies collapses. They are sophisticated-looking systems built on an extraordinarily fragile foundation, the assumption that you will always respond. The moment you stop, the entire structure falls apart, and silence is how you stop. Why toxic people fear your silence? To fully understand why your silence is so threatening to a toxic person, you need to understand something about the psychology of control. Every toxic person, regardless of the specific flavor of their toxicity, is engaged in a fundamental project, the project of managing their own inner world by manipulating the outer one. Because their inner world is, at its core, deeply uncomfortable. Whether it's unprocessed shame, unacknowledged insecurity, suppressed fear, or the hollow emptiness of a person who has never developed a genuine sense of self, the toxic person is running from something. And they run not inward, toward self-examination and growth, but outward toward stimulation, drama, and the temporary relief of feeling powerful by diminishing others. Your reaction is what gives them that relief. When you react and when you argue, defend, cry, explode, explain, you are confirming their sense of power over you. You are, in a very real sense, telling them, "You matter enough to me to disrupt my peace." And for someone who has spent their life feeling fundamentally unimportant, unworthy, or out of control, that confirmation is intoxicating. It is the drug their entire behavioral system is designed to manufacture. Psychologists who study narcissistic and manipulative behavior use the term narcissistic supply to describe this dynamic. Supply is the emotional energy that a person with narcissistic tendencies extracts from others: attention, admiration, fear, anger, tears. It doesn't matter whether the emotion is positive or negative. What matters is that the emotion is directed at them, that you are responding to them, that they have the power to affect you. Your anger, supply. Your tears, supply. Your carefully constructed argument proving why they're wrong, supply. Possibly the richest kind, because it means you spent time and energy and mental effort trying to reach them, trying to matter to them. Nothing confirms their power more than the spectacle of you working to be understood by someone who never intended to understand you. Now here is the devastating part for the toxic person. Silence provides none of this. Silence is a supply famine. It is the complete withdrawal of the resource they depend on. And because they have no other mechanism for self-regulation, because they have never developed the internal resources that allow a person to be okay without external validation, the absence of your reaction doesn't just frustrate them, it destabilizes them. Watch what happens when you go silent on someone who is used to provoking a reaction from you. First, they escalate. They say something more extreme, more cutting, more dramatic, because they assume the first attempt simply wasn't provocative enough, and that if they just turn up the volume, the reaction will come. When it doesn't, they often switch tactics entirely, suddenly becoming the victim, suddenly acting confused, suddenly pretending the provocation never happened. And when none of that works, something remarkable occurs. They begin to unravel. They start to talk too much, to over-explain themselves, to fill the silence you've created with their own noise. And in doing so, they reveal themselves. Every scramble, every escalation, every tactical shift exposes the machinery underneath. You see them clearly, perhaps for the first time, without the distortion of your own emotional reaction clouding the view. Your silence has become a mirror, and what they see reflected in it is the truth about themselves, the desperation, the insecurity, the hollowness of their strategy. Most toxic people cannot survive sustained contact with that mirror. They will either dramatically escalate and then retreat, or they will quietly disengage and find a more reactive target. Either way, they remove themselves from your life, not because you argued them out, not because you proved your case, but because you simply, again completely, stopped feeding the machine. The trap of reacting, how you lose power. There is a moment, you know it well, even if you've never named it, where everything goes wrong. Someone says something, a sentence, a word, a tone of voice. Maybe it's a veiled insult dressed up as a joke. Maybe it's a direct challenge to your competence or your character. Maybe it's something more subtle, a dismissal, a condescending look, a comment designed to make you feel small in front of people whose opinion matters to you. And in that moment, before your rational mind has even fully processed what happened, something in you fires. Your heart rate spikes. Your jaw tightens. The blood rushes to your face. Your thoughts accelerate into a kind of white noise. And somewhere in that storm, words begin to form. Urgent, sharp, defensive. And before you know it, you've already spoken. You've reacted. And the moment you do, you've lost. Not the argument. The argument might go your way technically, but something more important. You've lost the high ground. You've revealed exactly where your vulnerabilities live. You've handed your opponent a real-time demonstration of how to destabilize you. And perhaps worst of all, you've spent a portion of the most precious resource you own, your peace, on someone who was specifically trying to take it from you. This is the trap of reacting, and it is one of the most seductive traps in human experience. Because it feels righteous, it feels necessary, it feels like the only natural response to provocation. And in a culture that celebrates instant reaction, that rewards the sharp comeback, that treats emotional expressiveness as authenticity, it feels correct. But the Stoics saw this trap with extraordinary clarity, long before the language of psychology existed to describe it. Epictetus, in his Enchiridion, articulated the concept that Viktor Frankl would later famously restate. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom, your power, your entire capacity for self-determination. The stimulus, the provocation, the insult, the manipulation is outside your control. It happens to you. But the response? The response is entirely yours. It always has been. And every time you react without choosing, every time the stimulus bypasses that space and triggers an automatic response, you are not expressing yourself. You are being expressed by someone else's agenda. Think about what it actually means to react impulsively. It means that another person has successfully inserted their programming into your system and run it. They have, without your consent, often without you even realizing it, taken control of your behavior. Your mouth, your body, your emotional state, your actions, all temporarily operated by someone who wishes you harm. This is not a metaphor. This is what reactive behavior actually is, and the cost goes beyond the immediate moment. Every time you react impulsively to a toxic person, you teach them something. You teach them which buttons work. You give them a detailed map of your emotional landscape, where you're vulnerable, what you'll defend, what you can't let go of, what makes you lose your composure. And a toxic person who has that map will use it, repeatedly, precisely, with increasing efficiency. You are not just losing the moment, you are losing future moments too. The Stoic practice is to reclaim the space, to find that gap between stimulus and response and to live in it, not briefly, not occasionally, but as a permanent home. To make the pause so automatic, so internalized, so much a part of who you are that provocation no longer triggers a reaction at all. It triggers a process, observation, evaluation, conscious choice. Feel the emotion. The Stoics never said not to feel. Feel it fully, completely, without shame. And then, before it becomes action, choose. Choose whether to speak. Choose whether to engage. Choose whether this person and this moment are worth the investment of your energy and your words. Most of the time, you will find they are not. And in that choice, made calmly and deliberately, in the space between what happened to you and how you respond, you reclaim everything they were trying to take. Silence as emotional armor. Let's dismantle a myth that has been weaponized against you. The myth goes like this. Silence in the face of provocation means you accept it. That staying quiet when someone disrespects you is the same as agreeing that you deserve disrespect. That walking away from a conflict without responding is cowardice dressed up as composure. That if you don't fight back, you lose. This myth is not an accident. It serves a very specific function. It keeps reactive people reactive. It ensures that toxic people always have an audience, always have a target, always have someone willing to engage. Because as long as you believe that silence equals submission, you will never use the one tool that could actually protect you. Here's the reality. Silence in the face of provocation is not submission. It is sovereignty. It is the declaration, made not in words, but in the far more powerful language of behavior, that you alone decide what gets access to your inner world. That another person's cruelty does not automatically purchase a reaction from you. That your peace is not a resource that anyone can simply claim by being sufficiently provocative. This is what the Stoics meant by the concept of the inner citadel, the hegemonikon, the ruling part of the self that exists behind all the noise of the external world. Marcus Aurelius returned to this image again and again in Meditations, the idea that within every person there is a place of perfect stillness, a fortress of the rational mind, that no external force can breach without permission. The walls of that fortress are built from deliberate choices. Every time you choose not to react, not because you're afraid, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have made a conscious decision that your peace is worth more than the momentary satisfaction of a response, you add a stone to those walls. You reinforce the boundary between your inner world and the chaos trying to invade it. Silence is the mortar that holds those stones together. Think about the mechanics of emotional drain. When you engage with a toxic person, when you argue, explain, justify, defend, you are not just spending words. You are spending attention, focus, emotional energy, mental bandwidth. All of these are finite resources. You have a limited supply of them each day, and every interaction you have draws from that supply. A person who engages with every provocation is a person who spends their resources on whoever makes the most noise, which is, reliably, the person who least deserves them. They arrive at the important moments of their day. Their creative work, their relationships, their self-development, already depleted, already hollowed out by interactions that gave nothing back. The person who has mastered silence arrives differently. They have kept their resources. They bring their full capacity to the things and people that matter. They are not distracted by replaying arguments, not preoccupied with what they should have said, not carrying the emotional residue of someone else's toxicity into their most important spaces. Silence, practiced as a discipline, doesn't just protect you in the moment of provocation. It protects your entire day, your entire week, your entire life, by ensuring that the people who have earned nothing from you receive nothing from you. This is not coldness. This is not indifference. You can be warm, generous, deeply caring, and simultaneously be absolutely ruthless about who receives that warmth, that generosity, that care. Silence is the gate that only the worthy can open, and you are the only one who decides who is worthy. Marcus Aurelius and the discipline of not responding. It is the year 161 AD. Marcus Aurelius has just become Emperor of Rome, a position he never wanted and spent his adult life preparing for with equal parts dread and duty. He is now the most powerful human being on earth. He commands the largest military force in the known world. He controls more territory, more resources, more human lives than any person in history to that point. And he is surrounded, on every side, by people who want something from him. Senators who despise his philosophical bent and resent his restraint. Military commanders who question his strategies. A co-emperor, Lucius Verus, who undermines him through indulgence and incompetence. A court full of flatterers, sycophants, and hidden enemies, each one watching for weakness, each one waiting for a moment of impulsiveness they can exploit. If ever there was a person with both the power and the provocation to react, to silence critics with force, to punish ingratitude with the full weight of imperial authority, to let his frustrations spill into his governance, it was Marcus Aurelius, and no one could have stopped him. He chose a different path. Every night in private he wrote, not proclamations, not histories, not philosophy for public consumption. He wrote notes to himself, reminders, corrections, exhortations, the raw, unedited interior monologue of a man in constant conversation with his own character. These notes survived, collected under the title Meditations, and they reveal something extraordinary. The most powerful man in the world spent enormous portions of his private mental life working on the discipline of not responding. How much more damage anger and grief do to us than the things that cause them? If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. Not defend, not retaliate. Change. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Again and again, Marcus returned to the same theme. The recognition that a reactive response, however justified it might feel, however deserved by the provocateur, is almost always more costly to the responder than to the target. That anger, expressed as retaliation, does not diminish the harm done to you. It adds to it. It extends the damage from a single moment into a chain of consequences that may unfold for years. He dealt with one of the most challenging co-rulers in Roman history with patience so thorough it looked, to outside observers, like indifference. He received news of betrayal and responded not with punishment, but with the quiet removal of the betrayer from positions of influence. No drama, no public denunciation, no satisfying confrontation. Just the clean, efficient adjustment of a man who had decided, long ago, that his peace was not negotiable. His enemies found him, over time, impossible to fight. Not because he was invulnerable. He suffered deeply, personally, repeatedly, but because he refused to give them the reactions that would have fueled their campaigns against him. He denied them the supply of his chaos. What Marcus understood, what he practiced daily, in the privacy of his own mind, with a discipline that most of us will never fully appreciate, was that the discipline of not responding is not passive. It is among the most active, demanding, exhausting practices available to a human being. It requires you to feel everything and do nothing with it, to be fully aware of the provocation, to understand its intent, to feel the natural pull toward retaliation, and then with complete deliberateness to let it pass. Not suppress it. Let it pass. Like watching a storm from behind a window. The storm is real. The wind is howling. The lightning is striking. But you are not outside in it. You are still. You are watching. And when it passes, you are unchanged. That window, that glass between the storm and your stillness, is the discipline of not responding. Marcus Aurelius built it, stone by stone, over a lifetime of daily practice. And if the most powerful man in the Roman Empire needed to work that hard to master it, needed to remind himself every single night in private notes that he never expected anyone to read, then perhaps the rest of us might show ourselves some compassion about how difficult this actually is, and then get to work anyway. Epictetus. You control your words, not their actions. There is a cruelty in the story of Epictetus that makes his philosophy not just intellectually compelling, but morally staggering. He did not arrive at his wisdom from a position of comfort, privilege, or safety. He arrived at it from the lowest position a human being could occupy in the ancient world. He was a slave. Born in Hierapolis, in what is now Turkey, sometime around 50 AD, Epictetus was brought to Rome as property. He was owned by a man named Epictetus, himself a freedman who had become a secretary to Emperor Nero. The details of Epictetus's life in slavery are sparse, but we know one thing. At some point, his master broke his leg, deliberately, apparently to demonstrate that he could. As the bone shattered, Epictetus reportedly said calmly, "I told you that would break." Not in defeat, in observation, as if commenting on the weather. Whether this story is literally true or not, it captures something essential about the man and his philosophy. Epictetus understood, with a clarity forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, that the body could be controlled by others, that the circumstances of life could be controlled by others, that physical freedom, material comfort, and social standing were all vulnerable to the whims of power. But the mind? The mind was sovereign, and the words that came from the mind, chosen deliberately, guarded carefully, were the last expression of a freedom that no one could completely extinguish. His central teaching, later systematized in the Discourses and the Enchiridion, can be reduced to a single principle: the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us: our thoughts, judgments, values, choices, and responses. Everything else, other people's words, actions, opinions, and behavior, is not up to us. And the entire project of Stoic philosophy in Epictetus's framework is the radical reorientation of your concern away from the second category and toward the first. Applied to the question of silence and toxic people, this teaching cuts with surgical precision. When someone says something cruel to you, what exactly is up to you? Not their words, not their intention, not the fact that they said it. All of that belongs to the not up to us category. The only thing up to you is your response. What you think about it, how you interpret it, what emotional significance you assign to it, and whether you choose to reply. Most people act as if they have an obligation to respond to every provocation, as if there is some social contract that requires them to acknowledge every attack, defend against every accusation, engage with every antagonist. But Epictetus would ask, where does that obligation come from? Who wrote that contract? Who signed it? And more importantly, does honoring it serve you, or does it serve the person who provoked you? The answer, almost always, is that it serves the provocateur. Your response tells them they have power. Your defense tells them the accusation landed. Your engagement tells them you are still playing the game. It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. This is perhaps Epictetus's most famous insight. and its application to toxic people is immediate and complete. The toxic person's words are not inherently disturbing. They are sounds, air vibrations, patterns of language. They become disturbing only through your judgment of them, only when you decide, consciously or unconsciously, that they have some authority over your inner state. Silence is the behavioral expression of the decision. They don't. It is the living implementation of the dichotomy of control. You cannot stop them from speaking. You cannot make them kind, honest, or reasonable. Those things are not up to you. But whether their words purchase a reaction from you, whether they get to enter your inner world and rearrange the furniture, that is entirely, absolutely, completely up to you. And when you choose silence, you choose yourself. You choose your own peace over the performance of engagement. You choose to invest your limited time and energy in the things that are actually within your control. This is the lesson of a man who had everything taken from him and still found a way to be free. Seneca's warning: words are weapons. You hand to others. Seneca lived a life of extraordinary contradictions. He preached the philosophy of simplicity while accumulating one of the largest personal fortunes in Roman history. He wrote about the wisdom of retirement while spending decades at the dangerous center of imperial politics. He counseled moderation while navigating the court of Nero, a man who would eventually order his death. And yet, for all the contradictions, his writing carries a weight of practical wisdom that 2,000 years have not diminished. Because Seneca was not a man who developed his philosophy in isolation. He developed it in the arena, under real pressure, real danger, real consequences. And nowhere is that hard-won practicality more evident than in his extensive reflections on the danger of careless speech. His letters to Lucilius, written in the final years of his life to a younger friend, return again and again to the same warning. Watch what you say. Not as a matter of politeness or social convention, but as a matter of strategic survival and inner freedom. Let silence be your general rule, or say only what is necessary and in few words. This was not the advice of a man who had nothing to say. Seneca was one of the most brilliant rhetoricians of his age, a man whose writing still reads with startling freshness and power. His advocacy for silence was not born from an inability to speak, but from a deep understanding of what speech costs. Here is the insight that most people miss. Every word you speak is not just a communication, it is a transfer. You are transferring information about your thoughts, your feelings, your fears, your values, your vulnerabilities, your position. Some of that information is useful to transfer. Some of it is harmless, but some of it, particularly the words spoken in anger and defensiveness in the heat of conflict, is extraordinarily dangerous because it gives other people tools they should not have. When you argue with a toxic person and say things like, "I can't believe you did this to me after everything I've done for you," you have just told them that you measure worth in transactions and that you feel owed. That is a vulnerability they will file away and use. When you say, "I don't care what you think anyway," in that exact tone of someone who cares enormously, you have told them precisely where the wound is. When you break down crying in an argument, you have shown them exactly how far they need to push to break you next time. Every reaction is intelligence. Every spoken word in conflict is a dossier handed to the enemy. Seneca was operating in one of the most genuinely dangerous environments in human history, the imperial court of a paranoid, increasingly unhinged emperor who had already killed his own mother. Every word Seneca spoke in that environment could be the one that got back to Nero in distorted form and ended his life. And this reality sharpened his appreciation for silence into something almost crystalline. Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual, for men learn while they teach. And most significantly, make yourself a smaller target. Speak less. Reveal less. Give less away. In your life, the stakes may not be quite as extreme as Seneca's, but the principle operates identically. The toxic people in your world are listening. They are cataloging. The colleague who smiles at your frustration in a meeting is noting which topics make you reactive, and they will use that information in the next meeting, and the one after that. The family member who watches you become defensive about your life choices is filing that reaction away, to be deployed again the next time they want to establish dominance. The partner who picks a fight and watches where you reach your breaking point knows exactly how to manufacture the same effect next time. Your words in conflict are not just expressions. They are maps. And you are handing those maps to people who will use them to find you again. Seneca's warning, stripped to its essential form: speak less, and you are harder to find. Guard your words, and you guard the most sensitive intelligence about yourself, the information about what you want, what you fear, what you love, and what you cannot bear to lose. Your silence is your security. The art of strategic silence in conflict. Let's be precise about something. Not all silence is equal, and understanding the difference is what separates the person who practices silence as a genuine discipline from the person who simply stonewalls, sulks, or disengages out of emotional overwhelm. There are 3 kinds of silence that people employ in conflict, and only one of them is what we're talking about. The first is defeated silence, the quiet of someone who has run out of words, lost the argument, or been so thoroughly destabilized that they can no longer function. This silence communicates collapse. It tells the other person that they've won, that their strategy worked, and that they should use it again. This is not power. This is the wound. The second is punishing silence, the cold shoulder, the deliberate withdrawal of communication as a form of retaliation. This is sometimes called the silent treatment, and it is actually a form of aggression, using absence of communication to inflict pain, to control, to punish. This silence communicates, I am furious with you, and I am making you feel it through my absence. It is reactive, emotionally driven, and gives away just as much as an explosion would. The third, and the only one worth cultivating, is strategic silence. This is the silence that comes not from defeat, not from emotional flooding, but from complete clarity. It is the silence of someone who has looked at the situation, understood the dynamics, and made a deliberate choice. This is not worth my response. Or, I will respond but not yet, and not from this emotional state. Or simply, my silence is the most powerful statement available to me right now. Strategic silence is active. It is not the absence of anything. It is the presence of everything held deliberately in check. In practice, it looks like this. Someone challenges you, insults you, or tries to provoke a reaction. And instead of the immediate snapback that your nervous system is primed to deliver, you do something that will feel deeply unnatural at first. You pause. You breathe. You hold their gaze, or you look calmly away. You let the silence stretch. What happens in the room during that silence is remarkable. The other person, expecting a reaction, receives none, and the social pressure that was aimed at you suddenly has nowhere to go. It bounces. It turns back toward the source. The toxic person, trained by a lifetime of responses to believe that their provocations always produce reactions, is suddenly in unfamiliar territory. They don't know what to do, and so they begin to improvise. They might escalate, saying something more extreme, because they believe the first attempt simply wasn't provocative enough. Let them. Every escalation reveals more. Every additional word they speak while you remain silent is ammunition for your understanding of their character, their tactics, their motivations. They might backtrack, suddenly claiming they were joking, that you misunderstood, that you're overreacting to nothing. This is deeply revealing. The retreat from a position the moment it fails to generate the expected response is the clearest possible signal that the position was never genuinely held. It was simply a tool, and now that the tool isn't working, they're abandoning it. They might try to draw others in, looking to the room for validation, for backup, for the audience reaction that you're denying them. Let them try. Without your engagement, there is no show. You are not participating in the performance. And through all of this, you have said nothing, revealed nothing, lost nothing. Strategic silence in conflict is, at its essence, the art of letting the other person exhaust themselves while you conserve your resources. It is combat without engagement, and it is devastatingly effective against people whose entire strategy depends on your participation. When silence speaks louder than any argument, there is a paradox at the heart of this teaching that only reveals itself through experience. The more articulately you could respond, the more powerful your silence becomes. When a person with nothing to say stays quiet, it communicates nothing. But when a person who clearly has the intelligence, the vocabulary, the evidence, and the moral standing to dismantle an argument, when that person looks at their opponent and simply says nothing, the silence carries a weight that no speech could match. It communicates. I see through you. I understand exactly what you're doing. And I have decided that you are not worth the effort of a response. There is no counter-argument to this. There is no way to fight it. You cannot argue with someone who isn't arguing back. You cannot escalate against someone who isn't engaging. You cannot win against someone who has removed themselves from the game entirely. History is rich with examples of this principle in action, not as passive acceptance of injustice, but as the most aggressive possible form of dignity. When Mahatma Gandhi stood before British colonial authority with silence and non-engagement as his primary weapons, he was not conceding power. He was denying the colonial machine the thing it needed most: a reactive, fighting, disorganized opponent that could be suppressed through force. His silence, his refusal to engage on the oppressor's terms, forced an entirely different kind of confrontation, one the British Empire was not equipped to win. When Nelson Mandela emerged from 27 years of imprisonment and chose not to call for retaliation, not to meet violence with violence, not to answer the hatred of apartheid with answering hatred, his silence on the subject of revenge was the most radical political act of the 20th century. It denied his opponents the justification for continued conflict that a retaliatory response would have provided. You do not need to be Gandhi or Mandela to experience this truth. You simply need to find the moment in your own life and choose not to speak. The argument you walk away from knowing you could have won. The message you don't send, even though every word of it is perfectly correct. The accusation you let hang in the air without defense because you know that in the long run, the truth of your character will speak more loudly than any rebuttal. These are not small moments. They are among the most defining moments available to you, because they reveal to you and to everyone watching that you have mastered something rare: the ability to subordinate the immediate gratification of being right to the deeper satisfaction of being free. The best answer is sometimes no answer. The most powerful statement you can make is sometimes the one you don't make. And the most complete victory you can win over a toxic person is the one they never even realize has happened, because you simply weren't there to fight. How to train yourself to be silent under pressure. Here is where most discussions of Stoic philosophy stop being useful. They tell you what to think, but not how to actually do it when your blood is boiling and your hands are shaking, and the words are already forming before you've had time to think. Philosophy without practice is decoration. It looks good on the wall of your mind, but it does nothing for you in the moment that actually counts. The Stoics were, above all, practitioners. They did not simply contemplate virtue, they drilled it in the same way a soldier drills for battle. Because they understood that the moment of conflict is no time to be developing new behaviors. The moment of conflict requires behaviors that are already so deeply ingrained that they operate automatically. That the gap between stimulus and response is so well trained that pausing becomes the default, not the exception. So let's talk about the training. The 3-second rule. This is the most immediately practical tool in your arsenal. Before you respond to anything that has triggered a reaction in you, a message, a comment, a tone of voice, a look, you commit to 3 full seconds of silence. Not thinking about your response, not planning your rebuttal, just breathing and waiting. 3 seconds is not long, but it is, in most cases, exactly long enough for the initial emotional surge to begin subsiding and for your rational faculty to re-engage. 3 seconds is the gap made physical. The journaling practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote his most heated, most frustrated, most honest thoughts into a private journal. And then, having written them, he did not act on them. He processed them onto the page instead of into the world. This is not avoidance. This is one of the most sophisticated emotional processing tools available. You allow the full expression of the reaction to exist, but you give it a container that doesn't cause damage. Write the letter you're not going to send. Write the argument you're choosing not to have. Write exactly what you would say if you let yourself, and then don't say it. The catharsis is real. The cost is zero. The evening review. This is one of the core Stoic practices, used by both Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. At the end of each day, sit quietly and ask yourself 3 questions. Where did I speak when silence would have served me better? What did that cost me? And crucially, if that situation happened tomorrow, what would I choose differently? You are not using this practice to punish yourself for reactive moments. You are using it to build self-knowledge, to map your own patterns, to identify your specific triggers, to understand which people and which situations are most likely to bypass your rational faculty. This self-knowledge is the foundation of all genuine change. Breathwork. The breath is the fastest, most accessible tool for physiological self-regulation available to a human being. When you feel the onset of reactive emotion, the spike, the surge, the pull toward an immediate response, take 1 long, slow breath in through the nose, hold for 2 counts, and exhale slowly through the mouth. This single act activates the parasympathetic nervous system, begins to lower the cortisol spike, and measurably increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the rational, deliberate part of your brain. You are not just calming down. You are physiologically rebuilding the gap between stimulus and response in real time. Low-stakes practice. You cannot build the muscle of silence only in high-pressure situations. That's like trying to lift your maximum weight before you've done any training. Start small. The next time someone says something mildly irritating, choose not to comment. The next time you feel a small flash of annoyance, breathe and let it pass. The next time you're in a conversation where you could make a clever, cutting remark, notice the impulse and simply don't act on it. These small practices seem trivial. They are anything but. They are the daily compound interest of self-mastery, accumulating slowly and invisibly until the day you face a genuinely significant provocation and discover, to your own amazement, that the gap is there, wide, stable, and yours. The observer stance. This is perhaps the most advanced practice and the most transformative. When you feel yourself being provoked, try this. Rather than experiencing the provocation from inside it, rather than being the person who is angry, hurt, or defensive, step mentally to one side and observe the person who is angry, hurt, or defensive. Watch yourself as if from a slight distance. Not to dissociate or disconnect, but to introduce a layer of perspective between the emotion and the action. The Stoics called this the practice of the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty of the mind observing its own processes. From the observer stance, the provocation looks different. The urgency fades slightly. The choices become more visible. These practices taken together constitute a training program for the most important skill you can develop: the ability to remain yourself, grounded, clear, and free, in the face of forces designed to make you react. It takes time. It takes repetition. It takes the willingness to fail, to react impulsively sometimes, and to return to the practice without judgment. But every repetition strengthens the gap, and every time you successfully choose silence over reaction, you become a little less controllable, a little more sovereign, a little more free. The inner peace that silence builds over time. Most people come to the practice of silence looking for a tactical advantage. They want to stop losing arguments. They want to neutralize the toxic people in their lives. They want to be harder to manipulate, less easily provoked, more effective in conflict. These are legitimate goals, and silence delivers on all of them. But if you stay with the practice long enough, if you commit to it not just as a strategy but as a way of living, something begins to happen that goes far beyond any tactical benefit. Something begins to happen inside you that is much harder to explain and much more valuable than winning. You begin, slowly and almost imperceptibly, to become a different person. Not different in the sense of changed personality, or suppressed emotion, or manufactured serenity. Different in the sense that the things that used to disturb you begin to disturb you less. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've stopped giving them access. Different in the sense that your inner world becomes progressively quieter, more spacious, more your own. The Stoics called this tranquillitas, tranquility of the soul. Not the absence of feeling, not the deadening of experience, but the deep, stable, unshakable groundedness of a person whose sense of self does not depend on other people's behavior, approval, or acknowledgement. It builds slowly. In the first weeks and months of practicing silence, you will still feel the pull of reaction just as strongly. You will still notice the desire to defend yourself, to prove your point, to make sure the other person knows that you know what they're doing. You will catch yourself mid-silence composing the response you're choosing not to give. That's fine. That's the practice working. You're building awareness first, and behavior will follow. But with time, with months, eventually with years of consistent practice, something shifts at a deeper level. The pull weakens. The provocations that used to set off a full emotional alarm response start to register as something smaller. You begin to notice the tactics of toxic people with a kind of dispassionate clarity. Not because you've become cold to them, but because you've become genuinely less affected. The manipulation no longer lands the same way. Because somewhere along the way you stop depending on the external world to tell you who you are. This is the deepest gift of silence. The construction of an identity that is not reactive. An identity that is not defined by what happens to you or what people say about you or how you're treated on any given day. An identity that exists in the quiet space of your own values, your own clarity, your own deliberate choices, and that remains stable regardless of the weather outside. People around you will notice this change before you do. They will notice that you are harder to rattle, that you carry yourself differently, with a quality of stillness that is not aloofness, but presence. The kind of presence that comes from being genuinely at home in yourself. And here is the surprising social consequence of that stillness. It generates respect, effortlessly, without demand, without performance. Because human beings, for all their celebration of loudness, are instinctively drawn to stillness. We recognize it as a marker of depth, of self-possession, of someone who has done the inner work. We trust it. We listen to it differently than we listen to noise. The person who speaks rarely but deliberately carries far more weight in any room than the person who fills every silence with words. The person who declines to argue is more compelling than the person who argues everything. The person who can be provoked and simply, serenely, continues on their path is the person everyone secretly wants to be. Silence, practiced as a life discipline, becomes your identity. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of fullness. The silence of a person who is so complete within themselves that they don't need the world's noise to feel real. That is what the Stoics were building, in their journals and their meditations and their daily practices. Not a tactic, a life. Real-life scenarios, silence in action. Philosophy earns its keep when it walks off the page and into the specific, messy, inconvenient situations of actual life. So let's go there. Into the real encounters where silence either holds or fails, and what it looks like to hold it. Scenario 1. The undermining colleague. You're in a team meeting. You present an idea you've spent days developing. Before you finish speaking, your colleague, the one who's been doing this for months, interjects, not to add to your idea, but to subtly reframe it as obvious or flawed or something they thought of first. They do it with a smile. The room doesn't fully register what happened, but you felt it. The reactive move, challenge them immediately, point out what they did, make the dynamic visible in the room. This feels righteous, and it might even be correct. But it also makes you look defensive, potentially petty, and it shifts the conversation away from your idea and onto the interpersonal conflict. You've just handed the saboteur exactly what they want. The derailment of your presentation, and the impression that you can't handle criticism. The strategic move. Pause. Acknowledge their input briefly and neutrally. Interesting point. and continue with your presentation without losing your thread. After the meeting, when you're alone with the relevant decision maker, present your work clearly and let it stand on its merits. Over time, your pattern of calm, high-quality delivery versus their pattern of undermining will become visible to anyone paying attention, and they always are. Scenario 2. The provocative family member, the family gathering. Your uncle, the one who has opinions about every choice you've ever made, starts in at dinner. Your job, your relationship, your life decisions. He doesn't ask questions. He delivers verdicts. And he does it with the casual authority of someone who has never considered that other people's lives might not be his to evaluate. The reactive move. Defend your choices. Explain your reasoning. Engage with his logic. This path leads exactly nowhere, because he doesn't actually want to understand your choices. He wants to establish that he has the right to weigh in on them. Every explanation you offer is an acceptance of his jurisdiction. Every defense is confirmation that his verdicts matter enough to require a response. The strategic move. Listen without expression. Nod occasionally. Don't defend, don't explain. Don't engage with the substance of the commentary. If pressed for a response, offer something completely neutral. I appreciate the perspective. Then change the subject. What you're communicating, in behavior, which is the only language that actually registers with this person, is, your opinions about my life do not have the power to destabilize me. Eventually, the lack of reaction removes the reward, and the behavior diminishes. Not overnight, but over time. Scenario 3. Online harassment. You've posted something, an opinion, a piece of work, an achievement, and someone has decided that you need to be publicly diminished. Their comment is calculated to be maximally stinging and publicly visible. Maybe others are beginning to engage with it, amplifying it. The reactive move. Respond. Defend your work, your intelligence, your character. Counter their argument, point by point. Report them. Engage with the people responding to them. Every move in this direction feeds the algorithm and the harasser simultaneously. Your engagement is exactly what they wanted, and every response you give extends the lifetime of the conflict. The strategic move. Nothing. The absolute zero of non-engagement. Not even a visible decision to ignore, just the silence of someone who saw, evaluated, and declined to invest a single unit of energy. Online harassers, almost without exception, are seeking supply, attention, emotional reaction, visible distress. The silence of non-response denies them every form of it. Without the engagement of the target, most online harassment collapses within hours. And even if it doesn't, even if others pile on, your absence from the spectacle is itself a statement. You were not there to be diminished because you chose not to be there. Scenario 4. The escalating argument. You're in a disagreement with someone, a partner, a close friend, a sibling, and the conversation is escalating. Voices are rising. The original subject has been lost somewhere back in the exchange, and now it's become about something deeper and more dangerous. Who is right? Who is worth more? Who matters? The reactive move. Escalate in kind. Match their energy. Say the things you've been holding back. Make sure they know exactly how you feel about everything, not just the thing you were arguing about. Let the backlog of unspoken grievances out. This feels like honesty. In the heat of the moment, it feels necessary. But the damage done in the escalation phase of an argument, the things said in anger that were true but untimely, the wounds opened that take years to heal, often far exceeds the importance of whatever the original disagreement was about. The strategic move. Disengage. Not permanently, not stonewalling, which is its own form of cruelty, but a clean, temporary, clearly communicated disengagement. I need to step away from this conversation for now. We can continue when we're both calmer. And then, silence. Not punishing silence. Not disappearing. Just the space for both of you to step back from the cortisol spiral and approach the actual issue from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. This is not weakness. This is the decision that the relationship matters more than being right in this moment. Scenario 5. The unsolicited verdict. A stranger, at a social event, on public transit, in a comment thread, decides to offer their opinion on something about you. Your appearance, your parenting, your beliefs, your accent, your choices. Unprovoked, with full confidence. As if their perception of you is useful information that you somehow need. The reactive move. Respond. Explain yourself. Correct their misperception. Point out the rudeness of their presumption. Every word you say in this interaction is a word spent on someone who has given you nothing and asked for nothing but your reaction. The strategic move. A calm, neutral look held for just slightly longer than comfortable, and then the turning of your attention to literally anything else. No words, no expression of offense, no acknowledgement of the comment as having registered in any significant way. What this communicates is the complete, undeniable truth. You are not important enough to me to warrant a response. This is the most accurate possible statement about the situation, and silence delivers it with perfect precision. Your greatest weapon was always within you. We have traveled a long way from where we began. We started with a lie, the lie that silence is weakness, that the person who stays quiet has nothing to say or nothing to offer, that power belongs to the loudest and most reactive and most willing to fight. A lie so deeply embedded in the culture you grew up in that you've never even examined it. You simply absorbed it, the way you absorbed the language, the values, the behaviors of the world around you. And over the course of this journey, we have dismantled that lie, piece by piece from multiple angles, through the accumulated wisdom of some of the most battle-tested minds in human history. We learned that silence, as the Stoics practiced it, is not the absence of something, not the absence of words, or the absence of strength, or the absence of something to say. It is the presence of something, the presence of mastery, of deliberateness, of a human being who has done the inner work of separating their response from their reaction, their choice from their conditioning, their authentic self from the performance that the world constantly demands. We learned about the toxic people who depend on your reaction, who have built entire behavioral strategies around the certainty that you will engage, that you will fight back, that you will give them the supply they need to feel powerful. And we learned that your silence is not just a defense against them, it is a complete dissolution of their power. It turns off the machine, it removes the fuel, it leaves them standing in front of a fire they cannot start, holding a match that burns only themselves. We learned from Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire in the world and still had to remind himself every single night in private notes he never expected anyone to read, that the discipline of not responding was the practice that protected everything else, that every reaction given impulsively to every provocation was a small surrender of the sovereignty that he worked so hard to maintain. We learned from Epictetus, who was stripped of every external freedom available to a human being, and still found a way to be freer than his masters, because he understood that the only freedom that cannot be taken is the freedom of the mind, and that the words that come from the mind are the last expression of that freedom, to be guarded with the same ferocity with which he guarded everything else. We learned from Seneca, who navigated one of the most dangerous political environments in history, with the understanding that every word is a transfer, that every reaction is intelligence handed to an opponent, and that the person who speaks least reveals least, and is therefore hardest to find, hardest to wound, hardest to defeat. We learned the practices, the pause, the journal, the breath, the evening review, the deliberate cultivation of the gap between stimulus and response, that take these ideas off the page and into the daily reality of a human life under pressure. And we learned what builds on the other side of this practice, not just tactical effectiveness in conflict, not just the ability to neutralize toxic people, something deeper, quieter, and more lasting. The construction of an inner world that is genuinely, stably, unshakably yours. An identity that does not depend on being understood or approved of or defended. A self that is at home in its own stillness, regardless of the weather outside. This is what the Stoics were building. Not a tactic, a life. And now here we are, at the end of the beginning. Because everything that comes next is practice. Everything that comes next is the moment-by-moment, day-by-day application of this understanding to the specific, inconvenient, sometimes painful reality of your actual life. The colleague who is going to say something tomorrow that will make you want to react. The family member who is going to press exactly the button they know how to press. The stranger online who is going to decide, for reasons you'll never understand, that today is the day they try to diminish you. Those moments are coming. They always are. And when they arrive, you will have a choice. The choice you've always had, but perhaps never fully seen before. To react and give away your power, or to pause, to breathe, to hold the gap open for just long enough to choose, and to choose silence. Not the silence of defeat, not the silence of fear, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, the silence of someone who has everything and knows exactly what it's worth. Your greatest weapon was always within you. It was never the sharp comeback, the devastating argument, the perfectly timed rebuttal. It was this: the extraordinary, rare, deeply human capacity to be fully present to a provocation, to feel it, understand it, and simply let it pass. It was always yours. You were just never taught how to use it. Now you are. Go be quiet. Powerfully, deliberately, magnificently quiet, and watch the world change around you.